We've all heard the story about global population, right? The big, scary idea that there are just too many of us. But what if I told you that entire story is, well, wrong? What if the data today tells a completely different and, frankly, a much more alarming story? Let's get into what's really happening. So let me start with this quote from a 25-year-old Cambridge student. She said this after learning about the real demographic trends, and she was angry. Why? Because her whole life plan, get a great education, build a career, and then maybe think about kids around age 35, she suddenly realized that plan was a statistical long shot. Her personal aha moment is the perfect way to frame the massive shift we're all living through. This is the question that just feels so true, doesn't it? I mean, we see crowded cities, we hear about straining resources, it just makes sense. But this is what our source material calls yesterday's question. Because while we've all been looking one way, worried about growth, this incredibly powerful force of decline has already taken over. Yeah, this isn't a story about population just kind of, slowly leveling off. Not at all. It's about a decline that's picking up speed. And to really get your head around how fast this is all happening, we need a new concept. It's called the social half-life. But first, let's start with this number, 75%. Right now, that is the proportion of the world's population living in countries where fertility rates are below the replacement level. Just let that sink in. 3/4 of humanity is no longer having enough children to replace itself. And here's the kicker. Historically, once a country drops below that line, it has never, ever managed to climb back up. The key to all of this is the speed of the change. Abstract numbers like fertility rates, they're kind of hard to feel. Like 1.6 doesn't sound all that different from 1.5, right? But this idea of a social half-life, it makes the impact totally clear. It's simple. How long does it take for the number of babies born each year to get cut in half? And this is where you see just how exponential this whole thing is. Look, when a society is just a little below replacement level, the social half-life is a pretty distant 800 years. No big deal. But watch what happens with each tiny drop. At a rate of 1.8, it shrinks to 300 years. At 1.6, it's just 150. And by the time you hit 1.5, which is where most of the industrialized world is right now, the number of births is having every 50 years. That's inside of a single generation. And if you want to see this in hyperspeed, look at a place like South Korea. Their social half-life is now just 20 years. Think about that for a second. The number of babies born is set to get cut in half every 2 decades. And what's truly staggering is that just 35 years ago, South Korea was perfectly stable, right at replacement level. The speed of this change is just breathtaking. So this isn't some abstract problem for the year 2100. The consequences are already here, and they're building into a massive economic storm that's going to affect everything from your pension to healthcare. They call it the birth gap. It's actually a really simple idea. The birth gap is just the difference between that huge generation of workers about to retire and the much, much smaller generation of kids being born who will one day have to replace them, pay taxes, and fund all the social systems we depend on. Let's make this real. Take Italy. Right now, there are about 1 million people around age 50 who are going to be retiring over the next couple of decades. Okay, so how many babies are being born to eventually take their place in the economy? Fewer than 400,000. That's not a gap. That is a demographic cliff. And don't think for a second this is just an Italian problem. This birth gap has spread like wildfire across the entire globe. It's happening in Japan, it's all over Europe, yep, even in those Scandinavian countries that are supposed to have it all figured out with their pro-family policies. And now it's opening up in the US, Canada, and Australia too. I mean, the numbers are just shocking. You've got a 30% birth gap in Denmark, it's over 60% in parts of Italy and Spain, and then you have South Korea facing a 70% shortfall. Let me put that another way. For every 10 workers who retire, only 3 are being born to eventually replace them. The economic fallout from that, it's going to be huge. Okay, so the next big question is, why? Why is this happening everywhere, all at once? Is it just that people are deciding to have smaller families? Well, the answer is not what you think, and it points to a really deep change in how our societies work. So here's the twist. It turns out the number of families with just one kid hasn't really changed much in decades. That's not what's driving this. The only major statistical shift, the one thing that explains this massive drop, is a rapid and sustained increase in permanent childlessness. So what's causing more people to not have children at all? Well, the data shows this really powerful connection to big economic shocks. After the oil crisis in the 70s, childlessness spiked in Italy and Japan. After the Asian financial crisis, it spiked in South Korea. And after the 2008 mortgage crisis, boom, it spiked all across the West. When times get uncertain, people put off having kids, and that delay often becomes permanent. This quote just says it all, doesn't it? It is the voice of millions of young people, both men and women, who absolutely intend to have a family one day. Just not right now. First, they want to finish their education, get the career going, get their finances straight. But one day just keeps getting pushed further and further down the road, and for many, it gets pushed right past the point of no return. There's one final idea that helps visualize this whole phenomenon in a really powerful way. It's called the vitality curve, and it perfectly explains the mechanism of how this delay is literally reshaping our world. Imagine you plot the age women become mothers on a graph. Back in the 1970s, you'd get this beautiful, tight, symmetrical curve, with a really high peak right around age 24. This shape represents a cohesive society. Most people were on the same page at roughly the same time, creating this powerful, concentrated social energy, all pushing towards starting families. Now look at that same curve today. It's been stretched out, thin, and flat. There's no peak anymore. That collective energy, that social momentum for starting a family, it's been dissipated across 2 whole decades. We've stretched the timeline so much that everyone's life plan is out of sync, making it that much harder to find a partner who's on the same page at the same time. And that leaves us with this huge, profound challenge. Society spent decades stretching this curve out as time marched forward. But time only moves in one direction. It's easy to stretch an elastic band, but how do you get it to snap back when you can only ever pull it forward? That is the fundamental question we're all facing now. And the answer is going to define the future of our civilizations.